I'm Catherine. To give more context about myself, I'm from California, the Bay Area, but I have spent time living in Shanghai, Taiwan, Boston. I'm actually in Taiwan right now, so it is daytime, very bright and early in the morning right now. I'm 19 years old. I finished 2 years at Harvard, but I'm taking a gap year this year, so I would have been a junior, but on a gap year and will return in the fall. I study computer science with a minor in English while I was there, and I'm excited to go back to take more classes soon. In the tech world, I've dabbled in academic and industry research, software engineering at big tech, startups, nonprofits, worked on my own startup for a while, and more recently have been on the other side of the table in venture capital. So we'll talk a bit about this later on, but if you have any questions, I'm super happy to answer because I've been able to and had fun exploring different parts of the realm. In my free time, I really love to read, do calligraphy, and swim. And I like to say that my motto is writing, building, dreaming. And that's how I'm gonna talk about my story today, my journey to where I am now, and possibly, hopefully, give some takeaways and learnings from my journey in this writing, building, dreaming path that I've done. So to start on the writing journey, a lot of people are very surprised to hear when I tell them that I study computer science and English. It's not a combination that I think is very common, and people are like, well, they're so different. Why are you doing it? And to be honest, my love for writing actually came a lot way before my love for coding and STEM. Growing up, my favorite class was always English class. I really liked things from spelling bees to just reading any kind of thing, from like not just like novels, but also like blogs, graphic novels, screenplays, comics. I really loved reading everything. And at some point I started writing and loved it as well. So I've gone from the deep depths of fan fiction to writing like original writing. I like to write like science fiction, fantasy, mystery, but dabbling in a lot. Last year I also embarked on a lot of technical writing about AI, machine learning, and AI ethics. I also, for a few years, was a really frequent editor on Wikipedia, which is a very different style of writing as well. So I really loved a lot of different forms of writing and storytelling. And it was actually my love for writing that inspired me to go into building technology, building communities, building a lot of different things. So in high school, I realized my friends didn't like English class as much as I did because they really hated this one thing that was a weekly vocabulary quiz. We had to memorize 30 words every week, got quizzed on it, repeat. And my friends found it a really tedious process because of that. And when I asked them like, oh, well, I don't think it takes that much time, they're like, well, I could be using that time a lot better, like to play video games. So that got me thinking, what if you can make learning words a video game? And I didn't know how to code, so I taught myself how to make an app. And that, like for me back then, I didn't know anyone who was making apps around me. That was a really cool learning process, going from like learning how to design an app to actually coding the algorithms behind it, debugging, letting my friends and other people test it, repeat, like that whole process was really fun to me. And it's been really inspiring to see a lot of young students now building their own apps and sharing it with the rest of the world. So that was how I got into technology in the first place. And that actually made me realize that creating a product, a tool, writing code, in a lot of ways, it was a new form of storytelling for me, in that I'm telling a story to users and customers through what I'm building. And I extended a lot of what I learned from writing into the technology world. Like anything from just like the process of building and planning something was a lot like planning out a story, to like actually marketing a project or product was similar to marketing writing. So I've been spending a lot of time like hacking together projects. I use the term hacking, like just creating things, building things for fun, less the like movie type of hacking into databases and things. I also worked on different research projects, really just tried to learn as much as I can, learning from both successes and failures. And from the people around me, I realized that I also care a lot about my community. But in the tech community, there are a lot of smaller groups and communities that don't have access to resources to enter this field. I felt very fortunate to be in an environment, like being from the Bay Area, that I got to be exposed to a variety of interests from different settings and experiences. So like seeing how many people didn't have the opportunity, I spent a lot of my free time making resources more accessible and creating these lasting communities with impact and access in mind. So with more specific things or specific projects along the way, I thought I'd talk a little more about them. So this is Letterpop, my first ever coding project, where there are letters on balloons and you pop them to spell out words, and if it's a valid word, you get points and you learn what they mean. This was a lot of fun, and like it was my way of combining like language and technology. Another project in combining language and technology was actually one of the first projects I built at a hackathon. A hackathon is usually around 24 to 48 hours done over a weekend, where you and your friends create a project during that time, and you have a lot of fun learning and just like getting free swag together. And what we built that weekend was a Facebook Messenger bot for you to learn a foreign language in conversation. So like if I talk to the chatbot in English, they would reply in Chinese with a translation so I could learn via conversation. And that was a very different style kind of project that I built, a chatbot, but it was a lot of fun in being able to actually work on something that responded back to me, something other people could use and actually learn from. The rightmost project, which is also something in the language and technology combination or intersection, is a more recent project and is a project I worked on at IBM Research last summer, where I worked on a natural language processing for augmented reality. And this augmented reality tool is essentially an app on your phone. You point your phone camera at a piece of hardware, say like a computer or a printer that needs to be fixed. In COVID right now, it's extremely relevant because hardware repair is hard. It's very hard to walk into these hardware stores, get something fixed instantly. So such a product, when you point your phone camera at it, it shows you these AR animations of like what to do, what to follow, and guides you through it. And so I worked on automating that process to make it efficient and like scalable for people. And as you can see, like I was able to identify like the action and the object. So one of the sub actions in this is like pull the card from the slot. I was able to identify like pulling the card as what is being done here, and it gets mapped to the AR action, the red highlighted card, and it will show like pulling the card. And in general, like a lot of my projects have have wildly differed, and has been a great opportunity to learn no matter how big or small. On the community side, I founded or organized 10 hackathons over the years for over 5,000 students globally to create lasting tech and entrepreneurship communities, especially for underrepresented population. So I started with PixelHacks, top left, which was an all-female high school hackathon. It's actually running its 5th iteration with registration open right now if you're interested in checking it out. And that was the first time I really started opening up to like building something that involved a lot of people, involved a lot of outreach, fundraising, like thinking externally to a lot of these new skills I have never done before. And it's incredible because PixelHacks has built this community of high school women over the years that have been inspired to continue to keep learning computer science or create their own projects. And I've stayed in touch with a lot of people over the years who still email me telling me like, hey, I just started college today and taking my first computer science class. Or like, I went to another hackathon today building this. The bottom left one is Tech Together Boston, which it was held in this massive arena with like over 1,000 people, which was incredible. This is a all-female and non-binary hackathon that for high school and college students, and it was just an incredible, massive experience. Top right, I led Hack Harvard on campus, which is our campus hackathon. We bring in 600 students from around the world every year for 3 whole days. And last fall, because everything went virtual, we wanted to take a risk, do something different. And I led a collaboration among 6 Ivy League schools to put on this really gigantic, large-scale virtual hackathon that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own, but together we were able to do something really cool. And building communities, or I've learned in the process that building communities is like building a product in itself, even though it seems different since a community of people seems much less tangible than an app or an actual hardware product or just any product you're selling. However, there are so many things you have to think about, from like, how do I help as many students as I can? How do I reach them? Everyone comes from different backgrounds, so how do I equip them with the resources they need? How do I make these lasting initiatives with impact rather than creating short-term things that die out really soon? How do I build the right team for it, etc.? And a lot of these challenges have forced me to grow and learn along the way, and that's been really fun and exciting. So that sums up the writing and building arc of my model. What about dreaming? For me, I consider dreaming to be a step that's always in progress. I like to dream big and then go chase after them until they're no longer dreams. I thought I could start by telling you some of my current dreams and endeavors and lead into what I've learned from my dreams and my journey. And I'd love to hear some of yours too. One of my current dreams is something I've been working on over the last year. It was inspired by a research project I did where I quantitatively analyzed bias in language generation models like OpenAI's GPT-2. So you can see on the left, this is a language generator. What that means is you could give in a prompt and it will finish the paragraph for you. And I thought this was super cool. As someone who writes a lot, I was like, wow, AI can write too. And it was able to write full fiction pieces that seemed coherent and reasonable, nothing I've ever seen before. So I was messing around, and my friend and I, we tried in different things, and we soon found this really odd pattern where if we typed in like the man works as, we got the man works as a salesman, the man works as a doctor, the man works as a businessman, all like diverse, reasonable jobs or occupations. But when we typed in the same, but with a woman, the woman works as, like she has a job as, we would get the woman works as a stripper, as a prostitute, as a nanny. Then these are real explicit examples, and we were horrified. We were like, wait, this is crazy. What's happening here? And is it just a fluke with what we're testing? And so we did turn this into a more in-depth research project, found that it is not a fluke. It's definitely based on like what data they use to train this, and a lot of other factors along the way. And the more I got into the AI fairness field, the more I realized just how inaccessible a lot of papers and research topics are to all of us regular people, even though we're the ones being impacted by these issues of bias in AI systems. Like, imagine if media organizations use these AI writing generators going on in the future. That means that anything they could write out, tweet out, like, could have a lot of bias in it. And we've already seen that in a lot of things. So I started Fair Bytes, which started out as just a publication to share easy to understand, explainable pieces on a lot of topics. For example, GPT-3 came out while I was working on my project, so I was very interested to write about like its levels of bias in there, and just summarize both topics and new research that's happening in all these fields that people should be aware about. I started receiving a lot of responses and feedback on my articles, tens of thousands of reads, requests for articles to be translated into other languages by AI publications in other countries, started getting a lot of emails and messages from people who were interested in these topics. And I was really blown away. I was not expecting all this. And that's when I realized this is something a lot of people want and need. So I've been working on expanding FairBytes into a nonprofit, advancing AI ethics education through content, resources, and community. So like I've started small with articles and a pilot class on algorithmic fairness to high schoolers that went really well. And I'm excited to continue growing this more this year and onwards. I want to be able to use this channel to educate anyone from a 14-year-old to a 70-year-old about the consequences and considerations of tech and AI, because all this technology around us is being created for us and we're the ones using it. So we really should understand what's happening behind the scenes. We are actually having, like, something we're doing really recently is creating a new community to discuss AI ethics and technology issues. So if you're interested in, please join the community at the link above. And if you're interested beyond that, I'm also currently looking to grow the team as well, and feel free to reach out anytime. One of my long-term dreams is to be an entrepreneur, to found my own company one day, and I think this will be the last dream I personally end on. My main goal in my gap year this year was to throw myself into the startup world. I thought with this time, there's no better time to try a lot of different things. So I worked at a startup. I co-founded at a startup with a friend. I failed and left the team due to co-founder fit. Now I'm working on smaller projects to explore more ideas and different fields I'm interested in. And I've never learned as much as I have in the last 8 months. At the same time, I've never failed as much as I have in the last 8 months. As you can see in the two photos above, which I found really interesting, these are the two of the first photos I saw when I typed startup into Google. Failure is a constant in the startup world. The rocket can go up and instantly come back down. But to me, you can see the failure in two ways. You can see it as a complete doomsday end, or as a chance of learning and change. And I prefer to see it as a second way. A failure today isn't a failure tomorrow. It's a sign that I need to learn and change and grow from it. On the other side of the table, I've also been working as a venture partner for Contrary Capital, which is a venture capital firm for early stage startups. What does that mean exactly? It means that I'm always on the lookout for like interesting up and coming startups, especially by young people to invest in. And that's been another really fun but challenging journey on its own. Like, where do I go find these hidden ideas and startups? How do I build my relationship with these founders? And how do I evaluate what they're doing? And it's been a really fun process and given me great insight on my own startup and startup ideas as well, to keep that same critical lens on from other people's startups onto my own. And I think that's been a good way to like look at things from a different angle, to zoom out, to have a zoomed out perspective that helps me feel less stuck in the process and also just look at things from completely different points of view. And if any of you are ever working on anything interesting, I'd love to hear about what you're working on, so feel free to reach out as well. So my parting advice is that interest can come from anywhere or anything, no matter how big or small. There aren't any better interests or legit interests. I started writing out fan fiction that today, if I read them, I would cringe by the end of the first sentence, but it's been a really great and fun journey to keep writing and going on for many years. A second thing is I think a lot of high schoolers see themselves as needing to find their path as a STEM or humanities person very early on. I really disagree with that. I don't think there is anything as a STEM person, a humanities person, an art person, etc. You should take your path into your own hands and create your own story to tell. And I'm very excited to see what story you tell throughout the years. Third point is, as I was talking about, failure is always part of the learning process, no matter what you're doing, but it's up to you as to how you move on after it. I think for me, fear used to be a big part of what I was doing. I was really afraid to try out new things. But is it the fear of failure or is it fear of something else? And for me, it was a fear of failure. So once I was able to think about it from a different mindset, it opened a lot more opportunities and chances. The last thing, I don't like when people ask me what advice I have for them going into college, this is always the advice I give, which is to remember to zoom out. Many high school students, including myself at some point, like to center on college as like the important destination, maybe even the ultimate destination. But life is really beyond the 4 years of high school and 4 years of college. There's so much beyond it. Like if you're peaking at 18-year-olds or 20-year-old, what are you gonna do after that? So zooming out applies in many ways. I also think it's another way of thinking about it is how it's really easy to get lost in the challenges of school and work and all the insane things you talented young people are doing nowadays. That also leads to more stress, anxiety, and challenges. And it's easy to get lost in that and only think about the struggles and challenges and lose sight of the bigger things, like being grateful for family, friends, your safety and health during this time. And I think it's really important to sometimes pause, take a step back, and view things from a different perspective. Think about what you value and what you're grateful for, and see how things go from there. I'm excited to see all of you craft your own stories and dreams. And if we have time later, maybe at the end of Q&A, would love to hear about them too. So thank you all so much for listening to my story. Happy to take any questions. Also, if after today you'd like to reach out to me, feel free to reach out anytime on email or Twitter. I'm pretty active. I love meeting people, did over 100 virtual coffee chats last summer, so always down to meet. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. I have some example ones on here, but really feel free to ask away.
Okay, I guess I'm gonna start with a question. That was so great. Thank you so much, Catherine. I guess I want to hear more about like the failure, I guess, you experienced in your startup. Like, I guess what specifically was it? And I guess what you took from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think startups can fail many ways. And I think one way I've always heard is how your co-founder and team can really make or break your startup. This was the first time I worked on a startup, really scaling something up to a venture up to that size. And I met my co-founder through a community we were both in, but I've never worked with her previously, didn't really know her that well. And I think that was a problem in that because we have not worked together before, we don't really know each other that well. While our skills complemented each other, it felt like our personalities and working styles didn't. So eventually it got to a point where like it was like a blocking point for our progress. So decided to leave the team and move on from that. So finding the right team and co-founder is really important for your startup or like nonprofit, whatever kind of project or initiative you are working on. I see hands, but I don't know who raised it first, or so feel free to go ahead.
Connor,
Okay.
you go first.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought I was. I just didn't want to trample over anyone else. Thank you so much. Your story is so inspiring, and it was fantastic to hear. I was actually wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, yes, how you do find the right people, how you make sure that they're the right ones to go on a project with, and how working with others either enhances or detracts from your goals. And then, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really great question that I'm still figuring out myself. I think that growing up, I was more of the like work on my own mindset, but especially as I went more in the tech world, I realized how valuable having a team is because you can't just always be doing everything by yourself. So I think places like hackathons or even school projects was a really great way for me to meet new people and see how we work together. These are always like really small trial projects that you can figure out what your own working style is, what other people's working style is, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and seeing how they balance out. Like taking these smaller trials, experimenting is much less risky than going and diving head on into a startup with someone you haven't worked with before. So I would always take opportunities to meet new people, maybe work on small things with them, have fun, and see where they go.
I think I'm next. So, hi Catherine, good to see you again. Thank you. That was really cool. This is kind of like a large question, but I think you might have thought about this before. I think like FairBytes is a very like needed thing, especially as we're seeing a lot of ethical problems come up with like social media, just technology in general. So how have you thought about like what's the best way to kind of make technology more equitable, more equal for like obviously gender in the example you gave? How can technology companies, or how do you envision like a world where people integrate like ethics and real world considerations into what they're building?
Yeah, that's $1 million question that I think people and like even experts in this field can spend many hours talking about. Personally, for me, I think something to start off with is one of my goals is to help as many people as I can learn about thinking about AI and technology from both a technical and an ethical perspective, because I think both are equally important. And you need to be able to understand both sides to actually work and develop your own AI. And it's also important to think about like who is creating the AIs, like and algorithms, like who you're impacting, what kind of groups have like different effects, etc. I think a lot of these considerations are not being considered when current tools and products are being made right now. Companies are just starting to think about ethics. A lot of companies that do have an ethics team seem to put their ethics team very separate from the engineering and AI side, which doesn't make sense to me. You should be combining together to really make thoughtful and productive, impactful products that help people more than unintended harm. Yeah, Connor.
Yeah, thank you so much. One other question for you. As you mentioned, talked about your process in founding and building a startup. I wanted to ask when you thought like the right opportunity like to impact change was to build a new startup and to build or a new foundation or a nonprofit, and when would it be best to join an existing platform and kind of do change either within or change with them?
That's a really great question. I've definitely been on both sides of joining initiatives and organizations and starting my own. I think that for me, I've learned a lot from joining organizations in the beginning stages as a way of learning and seeing how things operate, how to efficiently run things, what things I can learn from here, and even things like I do not want to run a team like this is an important lesson. So I think that before diving in, it's always really helpful to join an organization or join a small initiative and see how other people do it, and joining really good like startups is a great lens to see. I think joining a good startup is a lot more valuable than joining a bad one, although you can learn a lot from like why a startup fails or is quote unquote bad. But like learning from really smart people is always a very helpful move going forward. And I would recommend a balance of both. And once you start something, you'll definitely learn so much from it. You'll realize like, oh my God, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing every single day. And you'll slowly learn more on as every day passes by. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just personally wondering, how did you get started from participating in hackathons and then organizing your own? Yeah,
I participated in hackathons, had a lot of fun at them with my friends, and I had been attending hackathons and conferences and noticed that there were just so few women at all these events. So I wanted to start something more geared towards women and guide them and introduce them into the world of not just computer science, but also entrepreneurship, pitching a project to judges, just like you would pitch a startup, etc. So I started building out PixelHacks. So started out in the all-female high school hackathon realm and expanded to more larger, scalable, generic hackathons too. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'll pass it back to the Innoverge team.
Okay, so that was great. Thank you so much again, Catherine, for just like a great talk. It was super inspiring to listen to you. So that's it for today. I dropped a few links in the chat. This is just if you want to get further involved with Innoverge. You can sign up to our newsletter, start a chapter like as a regional director, or you can be a mentor for our mentorship program. But other than that, hang out if you have any more questions. But that's it for today. Thank you, guys.